Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Beechcraft D18 project, turning the beautiful E-flite Beechcraft D18 into a US Navy SNB. All right, so I talked about the cockpit is the area I want to get to now that I've picked out my scheme. I know what I'm going to do is going to repaint the aircraft, but I like to get started on the cockpit because I want to cut the cockpit apart and separate it. And on doing that, you're probably going to damage the paint, which is fine if you're going to repaint it because who cares, right? But you don't want to repaint the entire aircraft and then pull off the cockpit and damage the paint. And as you see, I've actually already pulled the cockpit off. And sure enough, you can see I actually tore all the silver paint off that leading edge in the process of doing this. So glad I didn't paint the aircraft first, because this will not matter when I go ahead and repaint the aircraft because it will be covered over. So I encourage you to start in this area first, get your cockpit all detailed up, seal it back up with glue, and then you can go on with the rest of the aircraft. Now, to go ahead and separate the plastic part of the cockpit, this canopy region, from the foam, there's a couple things that you'll want to use. One, you're going to want to have a nice X-Acto knife here, and then you can use a popsicle stick or a stir stick. I think this is actually like a Starbucks stir stick. These actually work really well. They're pretty thin. They're thinner than a popsicle stick and a little bit smaller, easier to work with. But what we want to do is we want to take the X-Acto knife here, and you're going to run it right down the side of. You don't have to go in very far, right? You're just going to basically break any bond the paint has on the in these two surfaces. So run the X-Acto knife along the entire perimeter of the canopy surface, right? So that basically just split any paint that's holding it on the side. Then after that, I want you to take the X-Acto knife here, and you go in basically parallel with the canopy, really probably about 1/4 of an inch, and just slowly work your way around the perimeter. And what you're doing here is you're going to separate the glue between the two surfaces, right? So you just run this along. And I try to get about 2/3 of the surface. It's the easiest along here. This part here is extremely difficult, but if you can start, think how to best show this. Here we go. So you start in this direction here, insert the X-Acto knife, follow around the curvature as such, and like I said, just about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. You just want to break that bond of the glue, follow that around, and meet up with it on the side. So if you do that, that's allowed this to kind of pop open, right? You can kind of get it started. And that's where I use the stir stick. You put the stir stick inside there, and then you run the stir stick along the side. Now you're really starting to break out that bond of the glue, right? So you come across here, keep coming around, and then really once you get to about 2/3 of it done, you can actually start to grab this and pull up. Anywhere you feel that the glue is still really strong, go ahead and grab the popsicle stick here or stir stick. And let's say we're just going to run along the top here, and you can kind of pull up and lift and just continually work through the area, and then go back through with your hands and actually separate the two surfaces. So now you have the plastic, the canopy portion separated from the separated from the foam. And then at this point, you can also see that we have our little pilot in here. He's already been removed, this little guy in there. And I had to say, while he's a very nice looking pilot, he is not going to cut it for a military grade aircraft, right? He is not a military guy here. He looks very modern with his sunglasses on, his bright yellow shirt here, and headset. So this guy's not going to cut it for what I'm trying to do. If you're doing a civilian aircraft, this guy's probably going to be just fine. But for me, this guy's going to have to go, right? So we're going to toss him over to the side. And now you can kind of see, now we have the cockpit exposed. We have the pilot out of there. And it's all been finished in gloss black paint. Once again, not bad. It's just that it lacks a lot of the punch that I'm looking for one of my aircraft, right? If I'm going to go through and detail everything up, I want to make sure that the cockpit is included in that. So on the military version of the Beechcraft here, they use primarily 2 colors, and that is going to be interior green or cockpit green. It's kind of a bluish, greenish color, a little bit darker shade of green, and then there's zinc chromate, which is a lighter shade of green that you're going to see like on the top of the roof of the canopy. Sometimes the seat backs can either be interior green or zinc chromate. I'm going to use mostly interior green for this. So we have our 4 seats in here. Now normally if I had access to my CAD software and 3D printing, I'd cut these seats out and actually design more military correct looking seats. And they're not very comfortable seats. They are basically a stamped piece of steel or aluminum with, probably aluminum actually on this, I wouldn't have any armor plating on it, and then a seat cushion and your parachute. That's all you're gonna have. So not the most comforting, but for what we're doing in this project, considering how very little of the cockpit we're going to see, I'm just going to go ahead and paint these interior green. There's no instrument panel shown in here, no throttle quadrant, no yokes. So I'm going to work on fabricating some of those components. For the instrument panel, I'm probably just going to print off a picture of an instrument panel and glue it in here, and then cover the top of the instrument panel here with flat black vinyl. I think that works. I've had great luck with using that in the past. And then painting the sides of the walls inside here with interior green. And then there's also a bulkhead that sits right between the pilot and co-pilot seat here and from the passenger compartment, and that comes all the way up to the top of the canopy. So I'm going to be replicating that using balsa and foam to get that into place, and then fabricating the seat belts and the rest of this interior pieces before putting this back on. And you can see I've already started here. I already have the roof painted some sort of a green. It's supposed to replicate zinc chromate. It's not perfect, but honestly, now that I've painted it and put it back on again, you can't even see it. I've also painted interior green around the window frames, which you can actually see that just a little bit, but that's what the inside of the cockpit looks like. So while we have this apart, we've already determined that this little dude here is not going to be what we need. I have to go out and find some military pilots, and trying to find what the Navy pilots would have worn to fly this aircraft has actually proved to be extremely difficult. If you want to find a Navy fighter pilot in World War II, the internet there's hundreds of them, right? Everybody knows what a fighter pilot looks like. Well, what if the guy is in a fighter pilot? What if he's flying a transport aircraft or a trainer aircraft in Hawaii in 43? Well, that's extremely difficult to find out. Thankfully, I reached out to a number of friends, a number of different Facebook groups that specialize in military uniforms, and we came to the conclusion that if they were flying at lower altitudes, so no oxygen needed, warmer temperatures, they'd be flying with a khaki flight suit on, a baseball hat, a flight cap, with a radio headset over the top. No need for oxygen, no need for a leather coat, no need to stay warm. They're flying in Hawaii and they're not that high of altitude. Trying to find a model of that particular pilot, absolutely impossible. No luck finding that guy at all. So then I started just looking at what can I do with pilots I can find available, either 3D printed ones or ones commercially available. And I stumbled on this little guy here. This is the 1.1 meter Warbird fighter pilot that if you go on Horizon Hobby's website, you'll search for him, you'll find this guy here. He's made by FMS. He is supposedly sized for 1.1 meter aircraft. And those Warbirds tend to be about 1/10 scale, which happens to be the same scale that the Beechcraft is. So I picked up one of these guys, and unfortunately, as you see, he is a kind of a generic looking version of a Army Air Force pilot in Europe. Not our Navy Pacific pilot that I'm looking for. So I went back out and I reached out to a lot of my friends and started talking to them more about, well, what if the Beechcraft was flying where they needed oxygen and were over 10,000 feet and the temperatures were a little bit cooler? Well, happy to find out that in that case, they'd be wearing a dark brown leather flight jacket similar to the U.S. Army Air Force A2, but it would be a fur-lined and fur-collared one, and they'd be wearing like tan-colored flight gloves. They'd have a tan flight helmet on and oxygen mask. So, with a little bit of work and a little bit of paint, I was able to take our Army Air Force pilot and convert him into something a little bit more Navy, right? So he's got the khaki flight cap on, he's got his brown for the earpieces, the goggles are on, even though probably wouldn't have worn the goggles. Created a fur around his collar here, painted the the white over the parachute straps, and he's got his yellow Mae West on. He's got his scarf and his tan navy flight gloves. So while not exactly perfect for what I was looking for in this application, I think he's pretty darn close. And if you look at it, he's a lot closer than the pilot that comes with it, at least in terms of trying to be convincing that this is a Navy pilot in World War II. Now, to fit these guys into the cockpit, you would find that, unfortunately, the cockpit walls are a little thick. And so to fix that, I actually had to scallop some area out around the side of the foam here in order to let the pilot's arms fit in. So be aware that if you're either going to have to cut the arms off or scallop sides of the foam out to make sure you got room for the pilots to go in here. So with that said, we have now selected our pilots. I'm going to get this other guy painted up here, so we're just going to go with a crew of 2, even though we got 4 seats. I'm going to start fabricating this bulkhead that's going to go in the back here, the throttle quadrant, yokes, instrument panel, and begin painting and detailing up the cockpit. So when I come back, we're going to kind of go over that process and what I use to do it. I don't have access to a 3D printer and CAD to design this stuff, so we're going to have to fabricate it the old school way using balsa and foam. So it's going to be a little bit of a learning experience for me as well, since I don't usually do that too often. So we'll see what I come back with the results and kind of share you guys the tips and tricks I did to kind of spruce up this interior before we go ahead and glue that canopy back on.